And now, the great and wonderful story of Jonah and the big fish. The word of God came to Jonah, the son of Amittai. And God said to Jonah, go down to that great city of Nineveh, because the evil of that city has come before me, and I am going to throw that city down. Jonah got up and went in the other direction. He went to the port city of Joppa. A port city is a place where there are ships that sail back and forth across the sea, taking things to buy and to sell. And he got there and he bought a ticket on a ship that was sailing to Tarshish, the opposite direction from Nineveh, because Jonah thought he could run away from God. So the ship set sail, and as soon as it was out of sight of land, God sent a great storm with huge, gigantic winds, and it blew the ship back and forth and back and forth, and the sailors were terrified. They were frightened. They thought that the ship would break apart, and each one of them prayed to their different gods, because they all believed in different gods. And they took the cargo that was in the ship that they were taking to sell across the sea, and they threw it overboard. They hoped if they made the ship lighter, if there was no more cargo, maybe the ship wouldn't break up. But Jonah, he went down to the bottom of the ship and he just went to sleep. The captain found him in the bottom of the ship and said, what are you doing sleeping here? How can you sleep here? Get up, go up, pray to your God. Who knows, maybe your God will save us from this terrible storm. So Jonah went back up on the deck of the ship. And the sailors, they decided to draw lots to see who was responsible for this terrible storm. This is what it means to draw lots. You could do it in a lot of different ways. Lots of people, they take straws, and they have almost all the straws the same size, but one straw is smaller than the others. And then they hide the bottom so you can't tell which one is smaller, and everybody picks a straw. And the one that picks the short straw, that's the one that the lots fall on. And that's how they wanted to find out who was responsible for the storm. They didn't use straws. They used little pieces of sailcloth, the cloth that they used to make the sails to sail the ship with. And each little piece they threw into the captain's hat. And on one little piece, before they put it in the captain's hat, they put a little black dot. And they said, the one who draws the lot, the one who picks out the piece of sailcloth with the black dot, that's the person who's responsible. So they swished them all around and everybody picked out one. They each drew a lot. And Jonah drew the piece of sailcloth, drew the lot with the black dot. And when the sailors saw that it was Jonah, they said, who are you? What is your business? Where do you come from? What God do you pray to? And Jonah said, I am a Hebrew. I am a Jew. And I worship the one God that made the sea and the dry land. And when the sailors heard that, they were very frightened. And they said, what did you do? And when Jonah told them what he had done, that he had run away from God, they said, what do we have to do to you so that your God will forgive us and not break up the ship so that we will not all drown and die? And Jonah said, it is certainly my fault. I'm the reason that God has sent this storm. And if you want the storm to stop And if you want the sea to be calm, throw me over the side of the ship into the sea. But the sailors, they did not want to do it. So each of them went back and picked up his oar. And they started rowing as fast and as hard as they could, pulling as hard as they could, trying to get back to dry land. But no matter how hard they pulled, the harder they pulled, the more the wind blew and the more the ship was tossed back and forth. And so finally they knew they could not get back to dry land, and they put down their oars and they went and they took hold of Jonah and they called out to God and they said, God, please do not hold us responsible for the death of an innocent man. We are doing this to him. We are only doing what you want us to do. And they took him and they swung him once, twice, and they flung him over the side of the ship, and he splashed down into the water, and the water covered him over. And as soon as the water covered him over, the wind stopped and the sea became calm. The sailors were amazed, and all of them gave thanks to God, and all of them brought gifts for God, and all of them made promises, made vows that from now on God would be their God. But Jonah sank to the bottom of the sea. And just before he was about to die, God prepared a big fish, and the fish swallowed Jonah whole. And Jonah lived inside of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And at the end of that time, Jonah prayed to God. This was his prayer. He said, in my trouble, I called on God's name, and God answered me. From the belly of Sheol, I cried out, and you heard my voice. I sank. I was cast into the depths. I was surrounded by the water. Your waves and billows were over my head. I thought that I was driven away from your sight forever. Would I ever again gaze upon your holy temple? I sank. I was surrounded by the depths of the sea. Weeds twined themselves around my face. I sank to the very base of the deepest mountains in the sea, and the bars of the earth covered over me. And still, you brought my life up from the pit. Just when I was about to die, I thought of you, and my prayer came before you, God, in your holy temple. Oh God, those people who hold on to foolish things, they don't know what's good for them. But I will give loud thanksgiving to you, and I will bring you gifts. I will bring you sacrifices. And the promises that I make, I will keep. God spoke to the fish, and the fish spit Jonah out on dry land, and Jonah went home. Well, the word of God came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, again. And again, God said, Jonah, go down to that great city of Nineveh and cry out against it, because the evil of that city has come before me. And this time Jonah got up and went straight to Nineveh. Now, Nineveh was a very, very big city. It took 3 days to walk from one end of the city to the other. Jonah went in through the gate and walked for 1 day and came to an open space. And he cried out, "People of Nineveh, this is what God says. In 40 days' time, your city will be thrown down and you will all die because the evil of your city has come before God." But then an amazing thing happened. The people of Nineveh believed Jonah. And they said, "Wait a minute. Maybe we can make God's mind to change. Maybe God can forgive us. Let's stop being mean to people. Let's stop being cruel. Let's start being kinder and more generous to people. Who knows? Maybe God will forgive us." And when the word of what Jonah had said came to the king of Nineveh sitting on his throne, the king himself got up from his throne and walked down onto the ground. And he sat down in the dust, and he threw dust over his head, and he tore his clothes, and he put on sackcloth. Sackcloth is the rough cloth that they pack like potatoes in. And he used it for clothing, and it was all rough and scratchy. And he said, "This is the command of the king and all his nobles. Let all the people of Nineveh put on sackcloth, and let everyone stop eating. Let not a single piece of food go into anyone's mouth, and nothing to drink, and not just the people, but the animals too. Let no one eat and drink. And let us change our ways. Let's make ourselves better. Let's stop being mean and cruel, and let's start being kind and helpful and generous." And the people did what the king commanded. And the king and all of his nobles did what the king said. And God saw it. And God did forgive them. Jonah saw that God had forgiven them. And Jonah became very, very angry. He called out to God and said, "Didn't I know back in my own home, didn't I know that this is what you would do, that you would forgive them, that you were a forgiving God, that you were a kind and compassionate and generous God? Didn't I know that? Why don't you just let me die?" And God said to Jonah, "Jonah, are you upset?" And Jonah said, "So upset, I wish I was dead." And Jonah went outside the city and he sat down in a booth and he looked back at the city to see what God would do. That night, God made a tree grow up over Jonah, a tree with broad, wide leaves that brought shade, comfortable, cool shade over Jonah's head. And Jonah liked that tree very much. But the next morning, when the sun was about to come up, God sent a worm, and the worm ate up that tree. So that when the sun did come up, the sun beat down on Jonah's head, and it was hot. And there was a hot, dusty wind that came from the east and blew into Jonah's face and into his mouth. And Jonah said, "Oh, why don't you just let me die?" And God said, "Jonah, do you feel bad about that tree?" And Jonah said, "So much so that I wish I was dead." And God said, "But Jonah, you didn't make that tree. That tree grew up in one night and disappeared in one night. You had nothing to do with that tree, and you feel so bad for it. And what am I supposed to feel, God said? What am I supposed to feel for those 120,000 people who live in the city of Nineveh, who do not even know their right hand from their left? And what about all of their animals? That's what God said to Jonah. And that is the great and wonderful story of Jonah and the big fish.